Hello and welcome to the big debate, coming to you from Johannesburg on S3, SABC News Channel 404, YouTube and TikTok. My name is Tembekile Mkhototo. So for 150 years, South Africa has built its wealth on mining. Trillions of dollars of gold, diamonds, platinum and coal have been extracted from beneath our soil. Directly or indirectly, all our billionaires owe their fortunes to this history. Our city skylines, our banks, our whole economy built on the back of mining wealth. But what about the workers in the sector and their families? How can it be that after a century and a half of wealth creation and 30 years of democracy, South Africa is still the most unequal country in the world, with more than half our population in poverty and 1 in 4 children going hungry or stunted? Where has the wealth gone? And why isn't more of it being reinvested in a better life for all? Well, on today's show, we'll look at 2 industries which generate both wealth and poverty. I'm talking about mining and finance. And we'll ask, how can we reverse 150 years of super exploitation? Joining me to discuss this are Andile Zulu of the Alternative Information and Development Center, Dale McKinley, co-founder of Unpaid Benefits of the Unpaid Benefits Campaign, Isabel Fry from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, and from the Institute of Race Relations, we've got the head of Strategic Communications, Herman Pretorius. Lisom Tutyana is from the Institute for Economic Justice, and former Marikana miner Napoleon Webster is also here with us. We've also been joined by Mishak Mangula from Makua. In the audience, we have members of the Marikana community. We have pensioners working to access their unpaid benefits, and we have activists, community leaders, and young people from right across the country. Welcome to you all. As for you at home, you can have your say as well by using our hashtag #BigDebate. To kick off our discussion, have a look at this.
A community scarred by the brutality of exploitation. Though the area is rich in platinum, residents of Marikana continue to live in the trenches of poverty. On the 16th of August in 2012, miners fighting for better wages lost 34 of their own, while 78 others sustained injuries when police opened fire on them. All this because Lonmin refused to give workers a wage of 12,500. At the time, Lonmin claimed that it could not afford the workers' demands. But later, researchers found that the company took over R1 billion out of the country in the lead up to 2012 through sales commissions and other fees to Bermuda and London. The tragedy marked the beginning of Ntombizolile Musebetsane's life as a widow.
Because kwangekho umuntu usebenzayo to even isinxephezelo ungekho nix, but kuya kuhamba kweminyaka ke uLonmin wasithatha ngo-2014, so kwaqala ke ngokuba ngathi noko kuba bhetalana than before.
Left with 6 children and no income, Musebetsane and other grieving families were offered jobs at Lonmin. The gesture by the mining company, however, falls short of true justice for her loss.
Xa sinokuya kwi-strike asazi uba kuzokwenzekani, to avoid into yokokuba ke nguna kunga-endaphi abantwana bengenani nabengenayise. I think thina kungalunga vele nje sibe nenye indlela ethile ukuba singasi-attend i-strike.
Sibanye Stillwater say they are committed to uplifting the Marikana community, but many residents are not convinced. Sinatemba Women's Organization has been at the forefront of helping to empower women. Their limited resources, however, can only stretch so far.
Siyakaninzi ezimeetingini but akho nto iphumelelayo. But for me, into yokuba sisokole, kodwa we are surrounded by the mine that are taking our minerals and do nothing to provide for the communities.
Youth activist Gabisile Kanyile has lived in Marikana her whole life.
We don't ask for pity, we don't ask for mercy, we are not beggars, because whatever you are digging underground belongs to us.
I want to start with you, Andile, and talk about how common it is for mining companies to move money abroad while pleading poverty when the workers who dig up those minerals ask for the bare minimum.
It's actually quite a very common process. The central justification for why Lonmin was not willing to meet workers at the negotiation table was that we didn't have enough money. But then through investigation and research, we were able to see that Lonmin did in fact have the financial resources to be able to pay those workers and avoid the tragedy that happened initially. So what this is not just the problem of companies trying to maximize profits. Our legislation is built up in such a way that since 1993 from onwards, companies now have the room to be able to shift capital and avoid tax and not keep it in the country for development.
Herman, it sounds a bit like daylight robbery when the people who are digging up the minerals are told there's no money, but it's been taken to Bermuda, where the companies aren't even paying tax, and that's where they're choosing to store it.
Yes, it certainly does, and I think that is the mark of an unhealthy economy. The mark of a healthy economy is where you've got competition in all directions, that the workers can compete for jobs, but also that the big firms, the big businesses, must be competing for workers. And part of that should be that there must be upward pressure on these businesses to make it as attractive as possible. If you've got three companies, the one giving 10,000 Rand a month, one giving 11,000, one giving 12, then the other two that are giving 10 and 11,000 are going to lose out because the third company is offering a better salary. So that healthy economy is usually when the competition goes in all directions.
Dale, you're laughing.
Right from the beginning in '94, the ANC government made a decision to drop all exchange controls. Exchange controls are basically those policies that don't allow money to escape the country or allow companies to take their money and invest it overseas. So what happens? If you are feeling like you're paying a worker too much in South Africa, go to Vietnam. Invest there and open a company and pay them 3 times less. Go to India. That's what globalization does. So
Sounds like capitalist exploitation.
It's not competition at all. In fact, it's a fixed game.
Napoleon, you've worked in the sector. If we were more competitive, for instance, all of this would even out for the benefit of even the workers, would it?
Of course it will, and not only the workers. We have entrepreneurs. This narrative of always making us, especially the native of this land, to be the workers is wrong. We've got people who are ambitious to start businesses. We need a legislation that can compel the mining companies to start regarding us as active participants, especially in the operations of the mines.
Isabel, is it an issue of better legislation? Because whenever we have conversations in this country, you're told we've got the best legislation. Issue is implementation. Do we need more legislation to make sure that the workers in the mining industry actually reap the benefits?
Firstly, I don't agree we've got the best policies or legislation. I think that that's a mantra that we tell ourselves in order to not get to the issue. I think that the real issue is our gross unemployment in this country. We've got 12 million adults who don't have a job. There is no way a company can start, or a worker can say to a company, these are my demands. There is an untapped pool of reserve workers, and we don't have social security. If we had something such as a basic income grant where everybody had enough, which was paid for from taxation on the companies and other sources of wealth that we have in this country, and it levels to huge inequality, but it also gives everybody the certainty that whatever they do, they would have 1,500 Rand a month, which gives the freedom to be able to put those demands to the companies and get them to be paid.
So if we taxed these companies more, would that make up for the money that they are moving to tax havens, etc., or storing elsewhere where the founders are?
It definitely wouldn't, because the moving out of the money is a systemic problem. And like what Dale described, there were systems that were put in place to control the inflow and outflow of money that were then disposed of after '94. And now there are current processes that are happening which are aiming to protect countries from inflows and outflows of money. So increasing their taxation would be better. By moving the tax rate, which we had at 28% at some point in the past decade, to 27%, we lost 12 billion annually.
We're told that if we tax them more, we're scaring away business. Is that true?
We have e-mines here in South Africa. Where will they be scared to?
Isabel?
So the IMF gives loans to South African government, and they have conditions. The recommendation by the IMF to our government was not to increase taxation on companies or on people, but to cut the public sector wage bill, therefore to create greater unemployment. And that's the advice that we don't see.
Are we then not allowing, though, because whenever we talk about the likes of the IMF, people say, well, we're allowing them to dictate policy in countries, and that amounts to interference in some way?
Well, the question is, do we need their money or not?
Do we?
We see that there are different sources that you can get the money, but Treasury decides that we need to go there, get the soft conditions. And then I was in an international call with the IMF on Monday, and they said, it's your government's choice. We don't dictate, but they certainly strongly recommend. So those are the invisible compacts that continue to get made, and the impacts are felt by us every day.
Dale, I see you want to come in, but Herman, I want to come back to you. Why not tax mining companies more?
Well, the problem with corporation tax is that it's a tax on profits. So if you have an uncompetitive economy that can't capitalize on global trends, then you don't see those profits and you don't see those tax revenues. If we look at the late 90s to mid 2000s, the Asian commodity boom allowed South Africa to really capitalize on that. And we saw GDP growth, we saw unemployment going down, the number of black South Africans in employment doubled over a decade. So there is a question of whether there is a balance to be struck between making sure that companies do have an interest in South Africa and making sure that they do pay their fair share of taxes. It's a question of
where is the balance, Andy?
So I think there's this persisting idea that has our government hostage, that we absolutely have to create an environment that is completely open to foreign direct investment. But if you actually look at the patterns of investments over the past 20 years, investors aren't interested in labor-intensive investments, which brings jobs, because labor is also a cost and a risk. So what we need to do, it's not even about a balance, it's about South Africa finding a new way to grow our economy where we aren't held hostage by the interests of international finance institutions or by the interests of international capital or domestic big business as well. We have to find a new way of growing the economy that doesn't sacrifice our economic sovereignty.
Dale, what is that new way? And I'll come to you as well, sir. What is that new way?
In 1993, the corporate tax rate was 40%. Today, it's 27%. Have you ever, in the last 30 years, heard of our income taxes going down by 14, 15%? No. So it's a political will, it's a decision. At the same time as allowing these companies to take money out and not taxing them properly, we don't have a situation where our government has basically honored the social contract. Essentially, those who have money continue to make more money. Those who don't have money continue to make less money.
Okay.
This is the problem. If you want to deal with the injustices of apartheid, if you want to deal with the press, you've got to bite the bullet. And business will do business wherever there's business. You force them to do it.
I want to hear then from the people who are in the mining communities once more. When you hear everything that everyone has said now, are you hopeful that things will change in any material way for mine workers, their families, and the broader mining communities?
Deep and significant is that we have 20 to 90% of all the 11 minerals in South Africa, but we find ourselves living in poverty. And we say Africa is rich, but who benefits? We have laws that regulate the mines to make sure they benefit people. We call them social and labor plans. But all the mines that we've done research against those SLPs did not comply. 90% or 99% of these mines are not complying. If you go to any mining area, you'll smell poverty. These people are not investors. They are looting minerals, taking them away.
Thank you, sir. When we return, who owns the minerals underground in South Africa? And we look for solutions. Don't go away. Welcome back to the big debate on wealth and inequality. We're still talking about mining. South Africa has 90% of the world's platinum, 80% of manganese, 73% of chrome, and 40% of gold. We are ranked in the top 10 for coal, iron, and uranium. So theoretically, we should all be rich, right? But who owns the minerals underground? How exactly should we be mining them, for instance? And why do we criminalize zamazamas and let large mining companies get away with theft, as some have said, and even murder? Let's talk to some residents now from Marikana, the scene of that massacre just over a decade ago. We're joined on the show today by Ntombizolile Musebetsani, who lost her husband in the Marikana massacre of 2012. Mama, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I wonder how things have changed in Marikana today, 12 years on.
Ndingathi into etshintshileyo eMarikana yila 12,500 efunwa ngabayeni bethu. Yokuphela into esatshintshileyo. Imeko yokuhlala yabasebenzi ibutshintsha kancinci because kwenziwa ama-family units. But i-community isahlala emkhukwini kwindawo ezimdaka.
Okay, ma'am. We also have someone else from Marikana, Sister Tumega. How much responsibility should the mining company hold for the situation and the improvement of Marikana? Because Lonmin has come and gone. Now it's Sibanye Stillwater.
The mining companies, they got the SLP, but they not abide with that SLPs. In Enkaning, where we live, it's only the shacks. They promised to build 5,000 houses, but instead they built 3 show houses. The mine workers are staying in shacks. We have no water, no electricity. The roads are gravel.
Thank you, Sister Meg. I want to come to you, Andile. We were all outraged in 2012 when those dozens of workers were killed while striking for a basic living wage. 12 years on, Lonmin has come and gone, and we're hearing that the new mining company is not delivering on its commitments around development.
It's a pervasive issue. I mean, if you go to any mining area in the country, for example, we have activists that we work for in Mpumalanga. The roads are black with tar. Children are suffering from kidney stones. Children as young as 10 years old. People have their water being poisoned, yet these companies make millions, up to hundreds of millions every year. And it's 2 things. Primarily, it's the fact that, again, as Dale was alluding, this is about how an economy functions under capitalism. In order to remain alive as a private enterprise, I must stay competitive, I must reduce risks, I must maximize my profits, and I must increase costs. That means I must put profits before people. My concern isn't about the community. That's a legal obligation that I may have to fulfill. It's about my shareholders. My shareholders need returns on their investments. But secondly, what you have is a government that has a very dysfunctional relationship with the private sector and capital as well.
How so?
As was alluded to before, in fact, many of the policies that we've seen since 1996 reflect the interests of international and domestic capital. If you look at the austerity measures, if you look at the inability to control and regulate illicit financial flows, if you look at the fact that 75% of workers in South Africa earn about 5,500 Rand a month. And yet the private sector talks about we need to do away with minimum wage and have more accessible labor. You have a state that actively colludes with capital to be able to execute its interests.
So, Herman, that sounds as though we need to tighten the screws a bit more, actually, on the mining companies.
Yes, I think so. Ludwig Erhard was the Minister for Economics of West Germany after the Second World War. And he had this position that the greatest threat to economic freedom wasn't just a bloated government, it was also bloated commercial interests. And he made this point that big labor unions, big businesses, and big governments often work together to exploit the system in their favor.
I like the point you're making. I want to take it and give it to Napoleon. Do you feel as though the unions, big business and government have colluded, basically, to leave you as the workers worse off?
Yeah, it is very true. Unfortunately, we have leaders who are compromised. They're in government and they're also in business. They're used as security guards of the interest of the business. For instance, there's no mine that has been closed because it could not comply with operational conditions, taking care of the workers and so forth, because our leaders that we voted, they're part of the problem that we are facing.
Dale, a compromised leadership?
Yeah, let's just remind ourselves, our president at the moment made his money off of mining. So did the richest black man in South Africa, Patrice Motsepe, made his money off of mining. Now, mining was seen from the very beginning as the elite form of accumulation for a new black elite. As a result of that, the mining sector has been given a free pass. When we don't have politicians that have political will to act against because they are compromised, this is what we get.
If, as mining communities, you can't trust the unions, you can't trust the government you've elected, and you can't trust your employers, who do you turn to?
Well, we have to capacitate communities for them to be able to challenge the very same government, business, and the unions. And if people have knowledge, they will be able to act. But the mine itself don't even respect Section 24 of the Constitution, which says we've got the right to live in an environment that is not harmful and so on. But nothing happens to those people. It's because the government and the business, they live together. We have a regulation that regulates mines, MPRDA law. DMRE is the useless department in South Africa because mines are mushrooming all over the place because they give licenses without making sure protocol or everything is followed. And now we have people facing collusion and everything. Lastly, mine came into South Africa and did not rehabilitate. And when you don't rehabilitate, it's a criminal issue that they should have been charged for doing that. In Petani, Denko mined for 2 years without a license. And we've been talking to DMRE. Communities tried to stop that mine.
Okay.
And they were brutally eaten by police. 80% of the economy is owned by few elites.
So the few benefit from a large chunk of money. Herman.
Businesses are incentivized to cater to political interests through things like BEE. BEE sounds like it's supposed to empower black ordinary South Africans, but if you look at it, it's empowering a small elite at the top like President Ramaphosa, like Patrice Motsepe, and the poorer black people of South Africa are not gaining that advantage.
Whose fault is that?
Well, it's a fault of policy. The scorecard should be about how are you empowering your communities. You should be getting points for how many schools you are building, how many houses you are building, how good you are for your community.
When we come back, we will shine the spotlight on finance and banking and ask what happened to that 70 billion rand in unpaid pensions. This is The Big Debate. Welcome back to The Big Debate on wealth and inequality. South Africa is no stranger to corporate looting. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers, our corporate leaders are in the top 3 in the world for economic crime. Well, earlier this year, Marcus Jester, you might recall, made headlines when he said to have died by suicide after being ordered to pay R500 million for fleecing investors and shareholders through his company Steinhoff. But what about the victims when they are less well known, ordinary pensioners across the length and breadth of South Africa? Have a look.
Thomas Sekgotso was a mine worker for the now liquidated Ergo from 1979 until 2005 when the company shut down. Later investigations revealed Ergo had assets in the excess of 40 million rand. Yet despite this and Thomas's years of labor, he was not paid out any benefits.
Our pensions are not paid. Or even if they are paid, it will be that 1/3. The rest, where does it go to? Nobody knows.
In 2021, the FSCA, a government body responsible for market conduct regulation, was ordered to pay Sekgotso out for the unlawful cancellation of his benefits. Despite this ruling and multiple follow-ups, Thomas has still received none of what is owed to him.
Whenever we write or we meet them, talk to them, they say to us it's something new. They want just that we should all die so that they don't pay.
This is where we sit down as former employees. We need to stand up and fight for these people who have never been paid what was due to them.
Bank and mining CEOs receive hundreds of millions in payments, while workers are forced to fight tooth and nail to escape poverty. Movements like the Unpaid Benefits Campaign have had to step in and regulate the regulators. Still, so little is being done.
FSCA, please, we are dying. Have mercy. That is our money. We are not asking for it. It's our money. Give our money.
We've got Ndada Thomas Sekgotho with us in the audience today on The Big Debate. So your company, I mean, 2005, when they liquidated, it then turned out that there was some 40 million rand elsewhere. You're still waiting, even after 2021, when they were ordered to pay out your pensions. How has that affected your life today?
Hubima hahulu hubane ke na le bana hona tje ba entse grade 12 one o ile ko university a fetsa university, the other one I couldn't ke monke ke mise una batla go etsa nursing, he's also it's nursing up to today. FSCA is busy, it's already chelete, tsa batho ba di mining, hore di tshwaretseng ha ke tsebe, ba tseba o ema mole ba bua ka bo 200 billion, but ke 40.2 million resubmitile, but still ha re thole next until up to today.
And I want to come to you then, Lisa, because you were nodding there.
I think it becomes a problem, first of all, when the finance industry is the most dominant in a country. And the problem with that is that such an industry makes money regardless of what is happening. Last year, South Africa's economy was down. We have had the unemployment rate at record levels. These people made hundreds of billions. They are not really incentivized to care about the interest because whatever happens, they are good.
So, Isabel, how do we fix that when you hear from workers such as Mr. Sekgotho, where you're exploited basically during employment, then there is an order that says your former employer should pay you this money, yet the people who are supposed to make sure that all of that is happening are seemingly not doing their jobs?
Well, it does seem that we have different laws in this country. We have the Constitution, which is meant to guarantee everybody equal rights and the rule of law. But if you are not in the top elites, it seems that law doesn't protect you. And I think that's one of the aspects that we need to be looking at in terms of broader aspects of inequality as well. Because why should people respect and honor laws if they're not going to be protected? We have private pension funds where they have billions of unclaimed benefits, and they do very little to try and track down the people
Do
who
they
are
simply decide not to pay because they know that there'll be no real consequences?
I wouldn't like to venture into what they think, but I think that the evidence certainly suggests that they're very happy to take people's monthly premiums, but when it comes to paying out the benefits, they are not there. Why is it that the state, the regulators, are not doing as much in order to make that happen? Point about the Mzansi account, which was meant to have been created about 15 years ago to give everybody free banking accounts. None of the banks have lived up to their obligations in terms of that. And it comes back to how do we let the private sector run riot, paying very, very low taxes, but they're not part of their whole obligation to move and develop this developing country that we have. Instead, they just profit like the mines, so the financial sector extracts from ordinary people.
Angela, I want you to respond to what the question Isabel raises, how it is that we allow the private sector essentially to run riot with no consequences.
I think this conversation reflects that inequality isn't simply about some have more than others. It's about power. Because if you have CEOs that are earning hundreds of millions...
In fact, some of the CEOs in mining make well over 200,000 rand in some cases a day.
Yes.
Right? So then if you have someone who's earning that amount of money, not only does it mean that you are able to evade accountability through the law because you have these kinds of close relationship with the politicians that you're in bed with, it also then means that you're able to influence democracy in and of itself. You're able to influence what legislation and policy gets initiated and implemented. So we found out recently that people are giving upwards of 15, 25, 30 million to certain parties. What is your one vote against 30 million rand? And whose interests are going to be reflected when that party gets into government? So it is the rich who determine the shape of South Africa at almost every level of society.
Herman, what do we do about a financial sector that seems to be operating without any form of accountability?
The South African economy is wrongly incentivized, I think, in the sense that over the last 20 years, 2 trillion rand has gone into meeting BEE requirements. We have a system that under apartheid and under the ANC is now, if you can please the government rather than the people, you will get your business going. And I think that's a fundamental error. It should be about being a responsible corporate citizenship and not just pleasing the politicians.
Dale, is broad-based black economic empowerment part of the problem?
It's, it's a good in theory. But in practice, it's just like a lot of our law, the things are not implemented, so it's only a small group that benefits. But I wanted to get into this point about power. The bottom line is workers and poor people are simply not represented in the political class.
Break that down for us.
Politics has become about money. Who spends the most money usually gets there. If you don't have money, you don't participate. Simple as that.
Money buys you access.
And so you have increasing amounts of people left out of the political system. The biggest winner in our elections was the no vote. Why is that the case? Because people are saying enough. We don't believe in the system anymore because nobody represents us. So if you have the same people, politicians, people who run banks, people who run mines, everything else. They go to the same country clubs. They send their kids to the same private schools. They send their kids. Of course, they're going to take care of each other. Meanwhile, all the rest of us are left to the side.
Lisa, if the situation is as Dale is describing, how do we begin to go about accountability, especially accountability for people who've wronged the poorest of the poor, who don't have access to a top advocate?
I want to first address Uputi about the BEE. I think it's important we should remember who financed the BEE deals. It was the big banks. And it's often put that, okay, BEE, the face of it is black people,
No, it was white business. It was white
precisely,
business.
It was white.
They are still exploiting BEE to this day. Exactly.
Yes, agreed. And in terms of accountability, I think the state has the legislature to regulate these industries more. The state has the judiciary to ensure that the people that are found to have committed the crimes, we have the courts that are supposed to help prosecute and put those people into jail.
It becomes difficult, right, when you tell someone like Mr. Sekgoto who's been waiting, how much longer do you wait?
Can I just quickly say something? I studied law. The legal system has withheld accountability, and then you have absurd legal fees that makes accountability even more difficult for people to get. So just the affordability of legal advice, of legal aid, I think is also something that the legal fraternity should look at.
Isabel, I'll let you have a go.
And this is why I gave up private practice, because I thought that in a country where so few people can afford lawyers, there is no correlation between law and justice. And so that's why I went into social justice in order to fight for justice. But I think that law, healthcare, education, should be seen as the public good, and they should not be privatized. We cannot have an equal society when some people's education takes them into a different sort of stratosphere, where someone can have an operation and other people have to wait for months and months and months and don't have medicine in their clinic. We call ourselves a mixed market economy, but we're not. And the concern about...
What are we really at this point?
We're a market economy. I mean, basically, there's a move towards privatization, monopoly, and also state monopolies. I mean, the state-owned enterprises. But we do not have that counterbalance of social democracies. People saying South Africa is a social democracy. We are not. There is no point in which the state is the one that provides decent quality public goods for people.
Why then be opposed to privatization? I would say that if we want to disentangle these concentrations of power, the citizen as an individual, rather than the conglomerate of the abstract state, would be the best way to go about it.
That's an academic
I mean, but that's not a counter.
Hang on a second. The counter argument is this. If you privatize within a capitalist economy, those who have capital will get the benefit. That's the argument. No. Hang on a second. Basically, if you have a society that's much more equal, where everybody has that opportunity, then people can take things into their own hands. If you say privatize Eskom or privatize this, who's going to own those things? Not the people. Not the people. Not the people.
Come in.
The point about the extraction of surplus, I mean, that is what we're talking about. So where you have schools listed on the stock exchange, where you have private medical aids listed on the stock exchange, it means surplus that you and I pay doesn't go into the service. It goes into the hands of shareholders. And that is the point about privatization, is that there's an extraction of surplus which does not benefit the whole community. What we need is a cross-subsidization. If I have more, I put it into the system. Someone who doesn't have as much can take out from the excess that I put in, not going into some third party's shareholders' hands. That is the problem about privatization. Right. We see that at Eskom. What is load reduction rather than load shedding? It basically means that Alex and those poorer areas get cut off. The suburbs don't get cut off anymore. It means that you are concentrating the cost of being poor amongst the poor only.
Napoleon?
As a street lawyer,
street lawyer, okay.
Qualified by the street, I'm speaking to the ordinary South Africans. It is time we stand up for our land. You can hear here, we are only talking about corporations, investors, but we're not talking about you, the owner, the native. This land is yours, and we must take ownership, we must get organized, and people like you, Mish, you need to up your game so that we can be better educated. We are confronted by the monsters, the devils, people who don't love us, and they are bought, they are sponsored. So it is time we take our fight to the street. We need to close the mines. If they're not benefiting us, we need to.
By the way, we did invite the Financial Sector Conduct Authority to come and be part of the big debate and speak about the issue of unpaid benefits, but they declined. When we come back then, we'll look a little bit further down the line and see if there are any solutions on the horizon. This is the big debate. Don't go away. You're still watching the big debate on wealth and inequality. South African workers have been exploited for generations. What's your message then to the present or even future government? Do we need to focus on increasing economic growth or fixing the system that currently allows businesses to essentially loot? Give us your views via social media or WhatsApp, and let's hear from our audience.
Okay, nna lebitso la ka ke Thomas Malokotsa, and ke hlaho company organization Marikana Unpaid Benefits Campaign. What about the other companies? The companies like SA Brewery, Bull Brand, Coca-Cola, ABI. The companies who dietsa chelete engata. And haba qeta banka chelete ya basebetsi ba isa overseas. The fund dia cancel kantle ho molao because the FSCA ha yetse mosebetsi wa yona.
Igama lami Peter Malika from UPC. The problem esinayo kahle kahle within the country. Ama politician wethu, the top officials, they are involved with business. Bangama shareholder. That is why ama company kumanje we stand at 5,430 companies. Angabhadalanga abantu ama contribution wabo. 7 billion is standing unclaimed. Abantu bayasokola but abantu banemali yabo. So now if ever ama company bayeke ukuthi ba involve ama politicians, then maybe something can be done. And then ubheke manje last trade call, our own president unama shares kuma company, I think plus minus 10 or 15, our own president. Then the other officials, they are also involved. Okay. Then now what are we saying as people of South Africa? We need to stand up, stop.
2 points I want to make. First of all, I don't believe in our political system because it has failed us dismally. Nothing has improved. I'm so disappointed in my own president, Ramaphosa, because the only thing he could say to the massacre is, I'm sorry. No changes. Right now we have a mine in our auction. We're not benefiting anything out of it. But the ones who has given the legislations and the laws and how you acquire a license in my backyard to mine my own minerals, they're getting more money. And they're getting more healthier. We are getting more sick because these minerals you are digging out, they're affecting us. And you don't care about us. So let us stop funding the politics or helping the politics. Let us stand and be Abantu, Ubuntu, and back to the people.
Ethel Voye lona eMarikana. Desemarikana nje. Yenye into esingayazi ukuthi yenzeka kanjani. Ukubulala abantwana behleli kanje. 1. Inkokheli zala eMzantsi. Sithengisa ngegazi lingenacala. Kubantu abazokwenza imali la eMzantsi. Kuthengiswa ngathi. Kuvele kuthiwe asuka umuntu elanda nezovula imine la. Mezovula imine athi mina ngizobhadala imali ethile. Ithi president yethu mina ezama igusha ngiqhela uzicheba nasebusika. Sigodole. Imali asitholi true ubugreedy. Benkokheli zala eMzantsi. Kubhlungu namhlanje imizivaliwe. Akho say akho ntoni eMarikana. Kubhlungu into eseMarikana. Kubhlungu eseMarikana akho ndlela. Akho mbana akho manzi. But yenza iminyaka emingaphi imassacre yaseMarikana.
12 years kulonyaka.
Akho nto sibonayo. Shuthi kwabulawa izinja ezingenzanga nto. Buphi ubuntu ekugqibeleni. Ndikhumbula mhla sathi sise ofisini ye-community. Sadutyulwa sihlelele ofisini ye-community. Besuke entabeni. Bezodubula abantu abaselokishini emkhunkhwini.
Nidutyulwa ngobani,
Iwek
mama?
ngamajoni bhuti. And at that time besidubula sihlalele. Sizilungiselele into zethu kuba singabamama. Sifuna ukuya apha entabeni so save abatata abasizowaphi. Siyabaphekela, sibenzela yonke into. But kwafika amasoja. Uba bazodubula abantu entabeni bengenzanga nto.
Nkosi mama. I'll take more questions in a moment, but I think at this point it's worth pausing and just getting reflections from the panel. Isabel.
The tragedy of that story speaks through in a lot of people's stories that they've been sharing today. Just the elite compacts managed to sew up profits for themselves, but the reality of ordinary people who have been marginalized. We can talk about statistics, we can talk about 12 million unemployed adults, we can talk about the fact that we have the highest inequality in terms of wealth, we can talk about the fact that if you're born into privilege, your life trajectory will never be the same as someone who doesn't have that social capital. The government is not ensuring that people have a better life. This is 30 years of our democratic dividend. Those monies have been deducted from workers' salaries month in and month out. Why is it that this country is not giving to people what they have? And why is it that if a Zama takes, as you said earlier, they're a criminal. If an overseas mining company takes, they're allowed to not only prosper, but to not pay taxes in this country. Right. The inequality and the devastation is just a tragedy.
Mishak, I'll let you have the final one.
Yeah, you see, in South Africa, if you're able to protect the multinational companies, you get promoted. Cyril Ramaphosa made sure people are killed there for asking 12,000. And now he's promoted being a president to make sure that he keep the interest of the capitalist. What we saw in 1960 in Sharpeville, what we saw in past years is still happening in so-called democracy. These people are killing us. If these people are here to kill us, let them go. If these people are here to dig holes and leave us nothing, let them go.
Okay. Just on that point, there was a commission of inquiry into the Marikana massacre. It did not find that the current president of the country bared any culpability for what happened, but we know as things stand, people in Marikana are still waiting for him to deliver on that promise of a visit.
In 1980, the country was stopped from doing industries. Why were we deindustrialized as a country? We need to look at that. And how do we change the status quo of what's happening? It's good to talk, but we have no politicians to be told accountable, because we are told the president doesn't want to engage in such situations because there's a security threat to his life. But we as the people have a right to vote, and we should exercise that right each and every time that we go and vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We did invite various ministers to be part of the debate today, as we did with some of the companies as well. None of them were available.
Don't you think the government officials play a significant role in tax evasion, considering the fact that they monitor and regulate every MNC that comes to the country? So I think that we should reflect on our government status before we point out fingers to the MNCs. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Zotwa Ranyadi from Diploof. Do we really need these investors in our country? Or do we need the skills as Africans to look for our resources? That is my question.
Thank you.
Igama lami ndinguvusumzi Ncabi kaMahlangu, an ex-SAB employee at Chamdor Breweries. I-brewery ngo-monster. Abantu abamore than 1,000. 150 sebeshonile bonke, and then about 20 bedridden. Bemele imali yabo. SAB didn't give them their money. SAB iche imali yabo yayifihla to different administrators. UBC went and investigated. Yathola ukuthi imali eseJohannesburg Stock Exchange ise-Liberty Life iphinde ibe se-Old Mutual. SAB uma si-emailela ayifuni, we marched there and they chased us ngamapolisa. So they don't want to respond to anything.
How long have you been waiting there?
I was working there for 14 years.
And how long has it been since you've been waiting for your money?
21 years.
Okay.
Daniel Matibela. I worked for the company ebekade yenza ama components ebekade sebenziswa imayini lezi ama rock drill wokwemba yonke leyo nto leyo ya liquidatewa ngo 2013 since ekudala manje lawa ma-companies because manengi aliquidate abantu asikwazi ukufundisa abantwana bethu esikolweni uyazi imayini ngeke iqhubekele phambili uma kungenziwanga i-exploration ukubona ukuthi la ngaphansi kunani. It's only these companies ebezikwade sinikezela even ziletha amanto kanje izixhobo zokwemba emayini.
My name is Moagi Diseko. The last hope ya RNAS workers, the unions, it's on it clear to sang, but this betrayal. COSATU have been fighting this minimum wage, but all of a sudden, they advocating for minimum wage because before they said it minimizes the power of the trade unions. Now they turn their voices, they're changing. And then the other thing, post office workers, 6,000 have been retrenched, I think 2 months ago. The unions went AWOL. The problem, workers, when they wanted to claim their provident funds, the money has been deducted, but there's no money to be given to the workers.
When we come back then, we'll have the final word from the panel. This is the big debate. Welcome back to the big debate. We have been hearing from multiple people in the audience here how they've been affected by the frightening levels of inequality in South Africa. Let's get final words now from our panelists. Dale, your thoughts as we come to the end of this conversation.
Sure, my thoughts are very simple. We are in a situation where we need to reclaim our power. Real democracy lies with people. If people start believing that we can contest these things that we're all complaining about, we can change these things. We can. I go back to the organize or starve, organize or die, everyone together.
Mr. Mangule.
We need to look at the issues of Zamazamas being formalized and not having these so-called investors coming here to steal minerals and leave us with nothing. Thank you.
Herman Pretorius.
We are in a country where the incentives are wrong. The incentives are to please and enrich further an elite political class, whether that was the Broederbond or whether that is BEE. The big enemies of economic freedom are big government, big business, and big labor. And I think if we could re-incentivize what goes on in this country, that everyone who has skills can offer those skills in return for a salary, removing as many barriers to entry into the economy as possible and not keep on enriching the same elite few at the top. Everyone in this room have God-given skills, God-given talents, and a good economy is one where you can use those to earn a living, and that's not what we have.
Lisa?
Firstly, the workers need to own and control their workplace. And secondly, the rich will never care for the public. And so it's imperative that we use the power of the state to tax them, and tax them more.
Andile, what say you?
There's been a project that's been unfolding since 1996, in which those who have economic power within the private sector and internationally are attempting to continue a regime of exploitation and oppression. If the rich have been winning since 1996, the rest of us have been losing since 1996. And as Dale says, it's about people's power. What we have to do through our organization and our advocacy and our activism, we have to make the government more scared of us than they are scared of disappointing the private sector.
It's about fine.
We've got an export-oriented growth path, so it doesn't matter how poor people are in this country because it's not what we buy, it's what we export. That's also why we have a currency that counts against us in high interest rates. We need to look at the way in which people can take back people's power. If we don't, any new government is going to continue with the same macroeconomic framework that looks not at growth and employment, but at debt and inflation. That's not going to grow the economy. We're going to have the same austerity, cutting spending on education and schools and on basic grants and benefits. What we need to be saying is the redistribution that stopped in 1996 with the introduction of GEAR needs to be set aside, but we can no longer continue to be exploited because otherwise the next 5 years of this new administration is going to make today look like child's play.
Isabel, thank you for that. Napoleon.
We showed you South Africa in 2012, 16 of August. We confronted the system. and you ignored us. South Africa, it is time you demonstrate that this land is the land of your ancestors. Stop sleeping. Let's stand up and unite. Let us work from our strength. We need investors who can listen to us. They need our minerals. We need investors who can even produce final products of our minerals, not the investors who loot our raw material. No, it's time we stand.
That'll do it for this edition of The Big Debate. South Africa is rich in mineral wealth. We have the resources to deliver a better life for all, as you were just hearing, but it seems that business is failing to reinvest into the local economy. Will this change under this new government of national unity? Well, you decide. Take care. Thank you for watching.